little ventriloquism.
In 1968, two assassinations changed American television. Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were dead within 9 weeks of each other.
Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort.
And a country already terrified of violence turned on the most violent thing in its own living rooms: Saturday morning cartoons. Within months, the networks gutted their schedules. The superheroes were pulled, and to replace them, a CBS executive ordered a show so harmless it could never be blamed for anything. That show was Scooby-Doo. The network wanted a show that couldn't be blamed for anything. In April 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated.
I refuse to accept the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, unable to influence the unfolding events which surround him.
9 weeks later, Robert Kennedy was shot in a hotel kitchen in Los Angeles.
There's a cover-up that's about to happen here.
This is Situation Room. I read Kennedy shot in head.
The country was already in a panic about violence, and parents groups turned that panic on Saturday morning television. A new organization called Action for Children's Television had just formed. Senate attention followed. The network stood accused of feeding children a steady diet of cartoon brutality. Superheroes, monsters, fistfights, week after week. By the fall of 1968, the schedules had been gutted. Space Ghost, the Herculoids, the action shows, pulled or toned down. Producers publicly promised non-violent programming for the 1969 season. A CBS executive named Fred Silverman needed a replacement, and he had a hit to copy: The Archie Show, a band of harmless teenagers. He asked Hanna-Barbera for something similar: teenagers in a rock band who solve mysteries with a dog. The first version was called Mysteries 5. Then, Who's Scared?
Played for laughs in animation, and developed a show called Who's Scared, with 2 S's, Scared.
Silverman presented it to CBS executives as the centerpiece of the new season. They looked at the artwork and rejected it. It was too frightening for children. The entire point had been to build something that couldn't scare anyone, and the first draft had failed the only test that mattered. Writers Joe Ruby and Ken Spears stripped it down. They cut the rock band. They pushed the comedy. They made the cowardly dog the star instead of the kids. And on the drive to a meeting, Silverman heard Frank Sinatra scat "Doobie Doobie Doo" at the end of Strangers in the Night.
Frank Sinatra comes on, and I hear him say, "Scooby Dooby Doo." And it's at that point I said, yeah, that's it. We'll take the dog.
And renamed the dog Scooby-Doo. It premiered on CBS on September 13th, 1969. America's friendliest cartoon was engineered on purpose to be incapable of offending anyone. That was the assignment. There's a reason the gang felt familiar before you'd ever seen them. Even the 4 kids weren't really new. Fred, Daphne, Velma, and Shaggy were lifted almost feature for feature from a CBS sitcom that had ended 6 years earlier, The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. Fred was Dobie, Daphne was Talia Menninger, Velma was Zelda Gilroy, Shaggy was Maynard G. Krebs, beard and all. A teenage gang the audience already knew, made safe for a Saturday morning that had been ordered to stop scaring anyone. The dog was new. The kids were borrowed. The fear had been edited out before the show was even drawn. The most original feeling cartoon on American television was, underneath, an assembly job, built out of one ended sitcom, one rejected pilot, and a Frank Sinatra ad-lib. The character was designed by a man named Iwao Takamoto.
Iwao Takamoto, who became kind of the head stylist and art director for the studio. And what Iwao did was come up with designs.
He was born in Los Angeles in 1925, an American citizen. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States government removed him and his family from their home and imprisoned them at Manzanar, an internment camp in the California desert, alongside more than 100,000 other Japanese Americans. He was a teenager with no art training. Inside the camp, 2 fellow prisoners who had worked as art directors at Hollywood studios taught him to draw. That is where he learned the craft, behind the wire.
I felt that they were talking about in their description of the characters.
When he was allowed out to pick fruit on a farm in Idaho, he spent a weekend filling sketchbooks, walked into Walt Disney Studios with no portfolio and no formal training, and was hired on the spot. He worked on Cinderella, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp. In 1961, he moved to Hanna-Barbera. When he was handed the job of designing Scooby, Takamoto spoke with a Great Dane breeder who explained what a champion of the breed should look like. Straight back, straight legs, small chin. Takamoto did the exact opposite, deliberately. He gave the dog a humped back, bowed legs, and a big chin. Even the color, he said, is wrong.
Went in the opposite direction. For instance, a good, strong, straight back. So I sloped his back. A strong chin. So I underslung his chin.
His reasoning was simple. An ugly dog would be more beloved than a perfect one. The most beloved dog in the history of American television was drawn, on purpose, as a failure of his own breed, by a man his own country had locked behind barbed wire for the crime of his ancestry. Takamoto died in 2007. He was 81. There is a formula underneath every episode, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A town is haunted, a ghost, a phantom, a creature drives people away from something. A property, a mine, an amusement park, a stretch of coastline. The teenagers investigate, they corner the monster, they pull off the mask, and underneath, almost every single time, is the same thing. A businessman, a landlord, a developer, a banker, a caretaker with a quiet claim to the land, someone with a financial motive, using manufactured fear to scare ordinary people off something valuable.
Dr. Jekyll?
So it really was Dr. Jekyll behind the ghost of high jewel robbery.
The supernatural was never real. It was a cover story for greed. For an entire generation of American children, Scooby-Doo delivered the same lesson every Saturday morning for decades. The monster is a hoax, and the man getting rich off your fear is the real threat. This is not impression, it is arithmetic. Across the first 2 seasons of Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, the original 25-episode run that set the formula for everything to come, the gang unmasked 27 villains in total. 23 of them were stealing money. The supernatural was almost never real. It was a cover story for greed in roughly 85% of cases on record. For nearly 30 years, no one and nothing on Scooby-Doo ever actually died. The monsters were always men. The men were always greedy. Until 1998, when Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island broke the rule for the first time and let the supernatural be real and let characters die on screen. The show had been right about America for 3 decades. The first time it stopped being right about America, it had to invent actual monsters to make it work. For more than half a century, 2 open secrets sat on top of Scooby-Doo, and the studio refused to print either of them. The first was Shaggy, a jittery, perpetually hungry, perpetually paranoid teenager who saw the monster before anyone else. A character who, to almost any adult watching, read clearly as a stoner. Ruby and Spears denied it. They said a show with a stoner character would have been canceled on the spot, and that was probably true. The second was Velma, a short, brilliant, awkward girl who reacted to dating Shaggy as if she were doing a chore. Tony Cervone, a producer on the later animated series Mystery Incorporated, said in 2020 that the Velma he had written was always gay, and that her awkwardness around Shaggy was the entire point. Everyone on the inside understood. The studio kept editing it out. Other filmmakers outside the studio could see it too, and they would not stop making the joke. In 1992, Wayne's World filmed an alternate Scooby-Doo ending, pulling a mask off Old Man Withers and saying the line. In 2001, Kevin Smith put a scene in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back where a Velma lookalike laments that the gang never picks up hitchhiking girls, and the Shaggy lookalike smokes a joint he calls a doobie snack. For nearly 30 years, every major comedy filmmaker who touched the franchise reached for the same 2 punchlines. The audience was in on it. The studio was the only room not laughing. Then, one director tried to put all of it on screen. In 2001, James Gunn handed Warner Brothers a script for the live-action Scooby-Doo movie that put it all on screen for real. The film was originally rated PG-13. Shaggy was supposed to be smoking. Velma and Daphne, played by Linda Cardellini and Sarah Michelle Gellar, were supposed to kiss during a body swap sequence. They filmed it. The studio cut almost every frame of it. What survived was a wisp of smoke rising out of the mystery machine for half a second, and the name of Shaggy's love interest in the film, Mary Jane. Gunn has said it is his favorite name. It's It took until 2022 in the film Trick or Treat Scooby-Doo for Velma to finally be shown openly falling for a woman on screen. 53 years after she first appeared. The joke Hollywood had been telling for 30 years finally became canon. Then the studio did something even stranger with the show. In 2023, the same studio that had spent 5 decades keeping Scooby's secrets quiet handed the whole franchise to someone else. The show was called Velma. It went up on HBO Max on January 12th, 2023. Mindy Kaling created it, produced it, and voiced the lead. It was made for adults. Sex jokes, blood, swearing, and no Scooby-Doo. The dog was cut out of his own show entirely. Warner Brothers ordered it that way. The audience response was historic. Velma landed near the bottom of every rating system on the internet, a 7% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, a score around 1.3 out of 10 on IMDb. Briefly, the lowest rated animated series on the entire platform. Critics were split. Audiences were not. The studio renewed it anyway, then quietly canceled it after 2 seasons. For 50 years, the studio had said it was protecting the spirit of the original show. Then it stripped the dog out, dressed up the rest, and got booed off the stage by its own fans. The joke the studio kept denying made other people rich. While the studio kept saying Shaggy wasn't a stoner, the rest of the world made money off the joke. In 1996, a band called the Fun Lovin' Criminals released a single called Scooby Snacks. It was a rap song about robbing banks while high on pills. The chorus quoted Pulp Fiction. The song went silver in the UK. It got played on the radio for years. By then, Scooby Snacks had stopped being a dog treat. The phrase entered the dictionary as drug slang. The Oxford English Dictionary lists it now. To an entire generation, it meant Valium, or Vicodin, or weed. Not cookies. Today, in states where it is legal, dispensaries openly sell cannabis edibles named after Scooby Snacks. T-shirts, cocktails, whole product lines built on a joke a major studio kept saying was not a joke. Officially, the dog ate biscuits. Unofficially, an entire subculture had been pocketing the punchline for 30 years, and the only people who never saw a dime of it were the ones who refused to admit the punchline existed. Shaggy walked off the show over a single commercial. The voice of Shaggy belonged to Casey Kasem, the same man who hosted American Top 40, the most famous countdown show on American radio, carried at its peak by more than 1,000 stations around the world. He signed off every broadcast with the same line: keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. Kasem was a committed vegetarian and animal rights activist. It was no accident that the lanky, easygoing Shaggy was written as one too. In 1995, Hanna-Barbera wanted Shaggy to appear in a Burger King commercial. Kasem refused, on principle, to let the character he voiced sell hamburgers, and he walked away from the role entirely. He stayed gone for years. He only returned in 2002, after the producers agreed to make Shaggy a vegetarian on screen. He had effectively held his own character hostage over a moral line, and won. When he came back, he was already slipping. Kasem's last session as Shaggy was on April 19, 2009, a week before his 77th birthday, recording Scooby-Doo and the Samurai Sword. After that, the studio quietly handed the role to Matthew Lillard, who had played the live-action Shaggy in the 2002 movie. Kasem was already too ill to continue. He had voiced the character on and off for 40 years, and the handoff happened without ceremony because there was no time left for one. It would be a charming story about one man's principles, if you stop there. But that is not where Casey Kasem's story ends. Years later, nobody could find him. By 2013, Casey Kasem was suffering from Lewy body dementia, and his family went to war. His second wife and his children from an earlier marriage fought bitterly over his care. His daughter Carrie said she was being blocked from seeing him. Protesters gathered outside his Los Angeles home demanding visitation. The dispute moved into a courtroom. In May 2014, his wife removed him from a care facility in Santa Monica and moved him out of state to a friend's home in Washington without telling his children where he was. For weeks, they did not know where their own father was. A private investigator hired by his daughter finally located him, bedbound with pressure sores and an infection in rapid decline. His body was buried more than 5,000 miles from home. A judge granted Carrie conservatorship and the right to make his medical decisions just days before the end. Casey Kasem died on Father's Day, June 15, 2014. He was 82. The fight did not stop with his death. His body was held and moved while the family battled in court, and he was eventually buried in Oslo, Norway, more than 5,000 miles from his home in Los Angeles. His children later filed a wrongful death suit. The voice that told America every week to keep reaching for the stars ended in a custody battle over his own corpse. What happened to him was not unusual. It was a pattern. What happened to Casey Kasem at the end was not bad luck. It was a pattern. The same thing has happened to other huge American stars in their final years. Mickey Rooney, Stan Lee, Britney Spears, while she was still young. Families and handlers fight in court over a famous person's money and body, while the famous person can no longer speak for themselves. It runs the same way every time. The star is rich, the star is sick, someone close moves in, access gets cut, bank accounts get controlled. The world only finds out when the children or the fans start protesting in the street. Casey Kasem had been one of the most familiar voices in America for 50 years. The voice of American Top 40, the voice of Shaggy. At the end, his own children had to hire a private investigator to find their father. That part of his story does not belong to him alone. It belongs to an industry that has never figured out how to let its biggest stars get old in peace. They brought in a puppy to save the show, and the world came to hate him. By 1979, Scooby-Doo was dying. Fred Silverman, the show's earliest champion, had left for NBC in 1978. ABC was threatening cancellation and weighing Scooby against another pilot. Scooby was losing. So Hanna-Barbera added a puppy, Scrappy-Doo, Scooby's tiny, aggressive nephew, all puppy power and lemmy at him, forever trying to charge the monster while his uncle ran. It worked. Scrappy is widely credited with saving the franchise from cancellation that season, and audiences came to despise him. Over the following decades, Scrappy-Doo became one of the most hated characters in the history of American animation. Tim Curry, a lifelong Scooby-Doo fan, was offered a starring role as the villain Mondavarius in the 2002 live-action film. He turned it down on the record because Scrappy-Doo was going to be in the movie. The studio rewrote the villain at the last minute. Then came the film itself and the twist. In James Gunn's original draft, Scrappy was not the mastermind. The real villain was supposed to be Old Man Smithers, the Luna ghost from the cold open of the film, in a callback to the formula the show had run for 30 years. But somewhere in development, the studio rewrote it. They took the little dog who had once rescued the show and revealed him in the film's twist to be the main villain, the mastermind behind the entire plot. It was a punchline aimed directly at the fans who had grown up loathing him. The character that saved Scooby-Doo was put on trial on screen for the crime of being annoying and found guilty. The two men who made him left within weeks of each other. Joe Ruby and Ken Spears built Scooby-Doo together. They had met as sound editors. They were both Navy veterans. They were both from Los Angeles. They wrote the show that would outlive nearly everything else they ever touched. Joe Ruby died on August 26, 2020. He was 87. Ken Spears died on November 6, 2020 of complications from Lewy body dementia, the same disease that had taken Casey Kasem. He was 82. Barely 3 months separated them. They had spent their adult lives writing about kids solving mysteries together. They died in the same season, as if they had agreed to walk out the door together. One voice actor said goodbye without saying Scooby's name. By the end, most of the people who made Scooby-Doo were already gone. Don Messick, the original voice of Scooby himself, suffered a stroke in 1996 while recording at Hanna-Barbera and could never voice the dog again. Shortly before his death the next year, he agreed to appear at a charity event and perform every voice he had ever done. Bam Bam, Astro, Papa Smurf, Boo Boo, all of them by request. Every voice except one. He told the audience that quitting smoking had robbed him of the rasp he needed to play Scooby-Doo, and so the dog could not come with him to say goodbye. Iwao Takamoto died in 2007. Casey Kasem in 2014. Of the original core, only one man was still standing. One man walked away from all of it standing. Frank Welker is the last of them. He has voiced Fred since the very first episode in 1969. After Don Messick's stroke, he took over Scooby-Doo too, and he has been both of them since 2002. 5.5 decades on the same show, holding it together with one throat. Welker is now one of the highest grossing actors in film history. Not voice actor, actor. Movies he has voiced in have earned more than $17 billion combined, across more than 860 credits. In 2023, when HBO Max made Velma without Scooby in it, they still called Welker. He played Fred's father in the show that had erased the dog he voices. It was a quiet humiliation that he performed straight and got paid for. The men who created Scooby-Doo are dead. The man who drew him is dead. The original voice of the dog is dead. Casey Kasem is dead. Frank Welker is the one who walked away from all of it standing. The dog has outlived every show that ever held him. The dog is still on the air. New movies, new series, new merchandise, more than half a century on. He has outlived his creators, his designer, and his original voices. And yet here is the strange shape of it. Not one single Scooby-Doo series in all those decades has ever run more than 4 seasons. The cartoon keeps dying and being reborn. A new show, a new gang, a new voice every few years. The dog is permanent. The shows that hold him are not. That is the actual dark truth behind Scooby-Doo. Everything about him was built by real people who carried real weight and who are, almost to the last man, no longer here. The cartoon was designed to be safe and permanent. The people who made it were neither. And the dog has kept walking forward across every grave, into a new show, into a new voice, into the next Saturday morning that doesn't quite remember the last one.